quick introductions. My name is Tim Cohn. I'm the National Practice Director for Productivity here at Catapult. And we have Ed Higgins.
Hey, and I'm Ed Higgins, Director of Security and Compliance at Catapult. So happy to join you all today.
And it's telling that we have directors from both productivity and security on this call to talk about governance, because it is a subject that is dear to both of us, and we could both talk for hours on this. But we've tried to distill some of our advice and our guidance for this particular topic into a relatively short 40 minutes. So any questions, of course, feel free to reach out and ask. All right, if I can get the presentation to advance. There we go. Our agenda for today, and I get the first part, and then Ed's going to finish it off with some specific tool discussions. We're going to talk about governance. We're going to talk about the continuum of governance that within M365. The impacts of the governance transformation. What does that do to your organization? What can it do, and how should you minimize those impacts? And then we'll talk about some advice and some guidance on how to implement governance. So we start off with the discussion about how much do you need and where do you need to govern? And one of the things that's a particular note with M365 is, if you're talking, in this case, this workshop today is focusing on secure, productive workplace and Microsoft Teams, right? And even within Teams, that governance discussion gets pretty broad, because we start to cover SharePoint, we just cover OneDrive, Power BI comes into play, OneNote, Office governance around your Office applications and all the data that you create and all the intellectual property that you create within those Office tools. And then we start getting into Azure and other forms and other pieces of the M365 environment, right? The cloud services environment. And so as we start to talk about this, it's a little difficult for us to talk about governance with just one workload, with just Teams, or just SharePoint, or just Azure, because it all there are tenant level decisions that have to be made across that impact all of these things. And so with Microsoft Teams, it's connecting everybody, it's bringing all this data together, and it's open by default, right? And so a lot of the default settings in your tenant or around your particular workload options in your tenant, the default choice that comes when you first fire it up is around openness and collaboration. And there are reasons for that, and that's a good thing, and it can cause some concerns. We have many clients, these are actual issues that we've talked about with specific clients. So if, and a big one is that if we turn on Teams, or I turn on external sharing, or I allow people to insert technology here, right? We're gonna have compliance issues with insert standard here, right? And that's HIPAA, that's GDPR, that's FERC, it's SIP, it's CGIS, it's ITAR, it's PCI, so many, right? There's so many compliance standards that have to be addressed, and one of the things, proper security addresses a lot of those, and proper governance supports compliance. So the words in bold here are sort of my, if you could think about reading them in Yoda's voice, it would, but proper governance does support compliance, right? And so the other one is a loss of intellectual property, right? We've worked with biotech companies and other things that they make their money on their intellectual property. That is key to their business. So there's the security around things like credit card data and customer PII and all that kind of stuff. But then there's also your intellectual property. And so we want to allow our users to use the tools and create that intellectual property and collaborate, right? But we want to keep it safe. And so we have to talk about the balance of governance to make sure that collaboration versus security, we don't lose one for the other. The other piece of this is from the IT perspective. and Teams was like this when Catapult first released Teams. I think we had 200 teams within about 3 days, right? So we released it with no governance. It went a little crazy, and we've had to change things over time in order to make sure that even within Catapult's terms, things are governed, right, within our risk profile and what we do.
And Tim, that's a really good, actually great example of governance in action, where and it kind of gives the tell on what governance really focuses on when we use the word governance. Security, compliance, governance, they're three different words. They kind of mean three different things, but when we turned on Teams and we saw folks creating their own private teams and said, wow, we need to be able to manage this, that is governance. Unmanaging that opens up those doors to what could be compliance and security issues. So think about that for everyone here, the use of the words and how they correlate, but one is not the other, and vice versa. But that's actually a great example, because it happened to us. And it happened to us way before COVID, because we were using Teams a lot longer than that. So we had some time to adapt and rally, where a lot of clients moved quickly to a Teams collaboration environment because of COVID. So now they're thinking about the governance. So and the sprawling teams, how do I manage my data, et cetera, et cetera. So really good point on that, Tim.
Yeah, and taking some time and putting some effort into aligning your governance strategy with your business strategy will always pay dividends. Because there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to governance, right? It's people, it's process, it's technology. This is just a quick list of stakeholders involved in this. You've got your business users, employees, administrators, legal, as well as your CISO, your security officer, and all that kind of stuff. And each one of them has a different set of goals in mind. And so when you look at this, you have to understand that no one technology fix is going to fix all of this. It's a mixture of understanding who the people are, what they need, understanding that technology can't fix every problem. And we see this with things like phishing attacks and other things. There's training, there's adoption, and other people-oriented processes that have to go into place. And then then we do have some technology, and we'll talk through those specific technology pieces today that are available to help support the people in the process side of this. And when we go in and talk to our clients about governance, a lot of times we're talking to IT, and a lot of times we might be talking to the security office or legal, but it's really important to get all of these folks into the room, which makes finding the balance, right, a bit of a challenge, right? Because it can't be too tightly controlled and restricted, yet yet we can't open everything up and just let people do what they want. So we want to have that governance continuum. And that's even more important today. Other presentations have talked about the changing landscape for governance and for using the cloud, especially Microsoft's cloud tools. So one of my friend's kids said this, or my coworker's kid said this the other day. He was upset that now, because of online school, they will never have another snow day. And to me, that sort of reflects the changing environment in which we live in, right? And we need to, it's down there in bold, to adapt our governance, adoption, and security processes with the supportive technologies that are there, so that IT can do things for people and not to people, right? We need to be supporting our folks with collaboration, communication, engagement, letting them do the things they need to do, and support them and do things for them with these tools. And so we'll talk through talk through this here in just a minute. So governance is change. When you apply governance to your organization, and when we talk about doing things for people, a lot of it is understanding that people are going to be resistant to some of the people, process, and technology changes that have to happen to govern your environment. Technology is there to act. People are programmed to react, and so we have to anticipate that there's going to be some resistance to that change. This is a change curve that we use in adoption change management all the time. At first, people deny, resist, right? And then they start to look, and then they commit to the change. And so this is sort of a standard change model that we use. And then the personas for this change matter quite a bit. And understanding, again, on the slide we showed earlier that have all the people groups involved, how those are going to be impacted in this change that we're doing with with implementing governance. And so we talked a little bit about the impact of this. What do we do now? Like, why are we doing this? Governance is very important to streamline the deployment of products and technologies. One of the things we see with Teams deployments on a regular basis is they get stalled because of governance questions. And that's governance questions around, should we turn on Stream, right? Do we turn on, what about meetings recordings? What do we do with those? What about private chats? What about group chats? What's going to happen? And so by thinking about governance before you go into the adoption or while you're doing your adoption work, you will streamline the deployment. If you have a plan for it, you'll streamline the deployment of new products and technologies, right? It'll help keep your systems secure and compliant, and it'll help ensure you get a good return on the investment. You won't not use things because your organization is not sure what the impact of turning that technology is going to be. So we'll talk today about some global settings, some user-specific stuff, and then a little bit about the teams and the information in Teams lifecycle. When it comes to the people part of this, not every organization is going to have a governance structure like this. This is a model for a pretty large organization, but in your own way, each organization has to address the people part of this, and having the strategic, the operational, and what we call the local or day-to-day governance processes and technology in place. Without having executive sponsors and some kind of higher level steering committee group doing a digital workplace transformation or implementing a lot of this technology, is difficult, and it can give you unpredictable results. And so having the people in place to make these decisions and to help bring this change to a good business use is important. And that's what this group is, whether strategically, operationally, with training and user adoption, HR, communications, champions community. Can't say enough about building a champions community in your organization, people who will support their peers with technology adoption. The Evergreen Forum is something that's a little new for a lot of folks. It's people looking at the future from an operational perspective and how to implement that technology. Again, I think the idea here is that putting in one workload, like say Teams, is going to impact other workloads and other components of your organization. You need to address that. For teamwork, an example of this, right, with Outlook, SharePoint, Yammer, Office apps, and Teams, right, we're looking at Office 365 groups, Graph, and the centralized controls around security and compliance. All of that supports governance of the technology toolkit for teamwork. For communications and collaboration, we look at apps, Power BI, the post connectors, Teams, tasks, and projects. Again, it's Office 365, Microsoft Graph, and our security and compliance tools that are our support for the technology toolkit for communications and collaboration. So Microsoft Groups underlies a lot of this. And so when you're creating, groups, or when you're actually implementing a technology like Teams, having your Azure Active Directory, right, cleaned up, having your federation set, and having your infrastructure ready to go to do these deployments is really important. And so when you think about deploying Teams in your organization, having the foundational components around M365 groups is absolutely critical, right? So when we create a team, we're creating a group for collaboration. we're creating a group identity in AAD, and we're building that experience right in the app of choice in what we're doing, whether it's OneNote or SharePoint or Teams or tasks or whatever. We're building that experience within Teams using all of those various applications that are all supported by Active Directory and groups. Our general recommendations around Microsoft Groups is to have a group naming policy and an expiration policy, and you can see some of the benefits and some of the guidance there. It's important to have those policies in place. There's some links to documentation below. Pilot with specific groups initially. Make sure that the expiration is set so you can choose inactive groups based on the activity reports in the admin center. Make sure your help desk team is setting up the expiration policies and that we have that onboarded with the help desk team. And then we have some form of renewal process. So at Catapult, we use a Power App to do a lot of this within Teams, right? So we set up our expiration and other maintenance items as part of a Power App, and we use Power Automate basically to let people know that they're getting close to an expiration and they need to either renew or archive a particular set of resources. And so there's a number of ways to do this, but the guidance is to make sure that you have both naming policies and expiration policies in place. For Teams specifically, because I feel we really need to give some specific advice around governance here. It is important to create policies around creation, collaboration, and then some specific policies around meetings and voice. Our general recommendation is not to limit the use of Teams, but to put some specific controls in place. So build policies for templates, naming, blocked words is always good, and there's a standard blocked words list, but we like to add things like you don't want people creating an HR team if they're not HR, right? So you want to block some organizational names or key departmental titles from being created without administrative approval. You want policies for Outlook settings and mail, as well as the life cycle management of Teams. So that's renewals, expiration, archive, and restores. For collaboration, the recommendation is to allow the collaboration functionality by default and to restrict by exception. And so we need to create policies for SharePoint for the document libraries and everything, all the SharePoint items that are all the SharePoint libraries that are created as part of Teams. And so it's important to know that when you're governing Teams, you're also governing SharePoint is a big part of that. And so in the latest Ignite presentations, we've seen that Microsoft is doubling down on SharePoint as a development platform for Teams. And so it's going to be really important to make sure that your SharePoint governance is in place. And Ed will talk a lot about some of that as well with some of the tools that we have available. External sharing is a big piece of collaboration. There's quite a few questions there. And then, of course, the creation of public and private channels. For meetings and voice, hosting, scheduling, external access, audio, video transcription, stream is always a big question mark whenever we're implementing Teams for customers. Because of course, is that discoverable? Where do I put the videos, the recordings? And you have to, right now, you have to put some manual processes in around how long you maintain those stream recordings. So I think the document retention rules around that are still in progress.
Hey, Tim,
other ones. Yep, go ahead, Ed.
Just a quick question. A person named Sir asked a question, and I wanted to throw this in because you had been talking about people and the data associated with their Teams activity and stuff they store. A question was, if a person quits an organization, a group, a company, do they retain their email or OneDrive? Now, I answered it as the person that quits typically does not. but the employer can and usually does. I just want to make sure that in the grander picture of Teams use and people who use it from a productivity standpoint, that you saw that question and either would confirm that is the right answer or add to it.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to it. So a lot of our folks have their private tenants, and then they have their work tenants, right? And so so when someone leaves our organization, our offboarding process is to take control of their work assets, which is, and those work assets include that identity that's associated with catapultsystems.com. And so we pull all their OneDrive and have full access to it, and we pull that. We remove the access that person has to that identity. And so I think that's part of when we talk about having your policy set for AAD or Azure Active Directory and getting that in place, whether you're using another identity provider or not. You've got to make sure that because all this stuff is now in the cloud, that folks aren't leaving with intellectual property. This is particularly important for like research companies and others, where you want to not even allow access to another identity from your organizational resources.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, another one you can set on meetings of voice, and we're seeing this a little bit today, network and quality of service settings. There's some new functionality that just came out at Ignite for creating Power BI dashboards around quality of service with meetings and voice. I don't have those ready to demo yet, but we will soon. This is our list, our standard list of Teams functional governance topics that we run through with customers. And so as you can see, there's quite a bit to cover. But we'll leave this in the deck that you can access. And if you want to use this as a guide to driving some of your own Teams deployments, this is just a quick list basically of all the pieces that we'll talk about. And some of the things that Ed will talk about address policies around data loss prevention, retention, e-discovery, supervision. And again, some of these are manual processes, and some of these are guided by technology. And so this is where I'll transition to Ed to talk about some of these tools.
Great, thank you, Tim. So governance is how shall we use it? What should we allow to create? When do we expire it, etc. Now you layer in that balance thing that Tim was talking about, where productivity and too much governance, too heavy on one side, is out of kilter. It's not in the Goldilocks, we sometimes say. Same is true for security. Too much availability means that the security is lax, and that can have a problem. Or too much security kind of counters the availability of access or data or whatever the magic word is there, the operand. So it's also in security about finding the right spot. Now, with those of you, and all of you have Microsoft 365 or Office 365 space, or are planning to move to it, as you contemplate those things, and the ability, which by the way, the data storage side in Teams is OneDrive and SharePoint, and it's traditional data. So if you had a SharePoint server and you were wanting to safeguard data, which is kind of ultimately the reason why we collaborate and work, is to kind of get at those things through applications or directly. But in a productivity standpoint in the modern workplace, you want to apply protections to the things, so data doesn't leak out. Sensitive data, you don't want to get outside of your control and purview. You also want to be able to protect the identity. That's not on this list, but it's still really relevant. And you'll see as we touch on a few of these other things, and then a big one that often it's not underestimated because it spans the entirety of the Microsoft 365 stack. Is Microsoft Information Protection, or Azure Information Protection is its former name. But forgive us on the use of AIP, because it's a couple of years of habit that's hard to break. But if you'll take us to the next slide, Tim, we'll kind of step through some of these things. So if you take from an information security standpoint, your business directive on data classification, that is, bottom line, that is a written document signed by a CXO that says this is how we classify data. This is our intellectual property. This is public data. If we lose it, we don't. It's not that we don't care about whose hands it's in, but it doesn't harm the business if public information is out, because it's already out there. But then on the other hand, on the farthest end of the spectrum, what if some of that data you have has people's national IDs, their passport number, their social security number? Your written classification defines that. And then your tools, your alignment of how do you access it, what rights do you have, where those settings are established, should we encrypt it or not, those get set by the top level design. And now, as that next little pull down shows, email, files, line of business apps, things like that. Once you define your classification, then it applies to all of your activity in 365, including what you share internally. If I share a document with Tim and it's a sensitive document, but he doesn't have the rights, not the right, but the rights by the company to see that type of data, then he won't be able to open it. And the company's governance may allow that I can extend that right to him, but you kind of get the idea of even to the extent of how data is shared. When we do security work, we often find, let's say in a positive way, tremendous opportunity for improving and optimizing the control of externally shared data. It's often a gap. Someone will set up a spreadsheet with some sensitive info for a legitimate legacy business reason, and they may share it with a few external resources, kind of individuals or a B2B, payroll company maybe. But then you change your business relationships, and those shares become stale. And so governance and security goes hand in hand on that. So whether it's shared internally or externally with B2B or B2C relationships. And the next one, Tim. And the key part about AIP and how it benefits you is that it works anywhere in the world on any device, because it's associated with the data and the identity. So I'm basically applying what's called a zero trust model of validating the user is who they say they are. And we're going to get to that in a moment, because when we're in a work from home situation and we're using Teams and all of those back end things with that governance, there's some security things that go along with it. But AIP can protect your sensitive data no matter where it happens to land. Could be in Gmail, it could be in Box or Dropbox, or not knocking those platforms, but it could wind up where your IT and your governance process aren't aware of that. So this helps safeguard the protection of that data at various different levels and different actions based on that level. You may say, hey, it's okay for this intellectual property to go to my trading partner, and it's okay for them to open it, but we don't want them to share it beyond them. You can set that up. You can say this can never leave our domain, and disallowed actions regarding the content of that data. So the spreadsheet may go to my Dropbox account, but I may not be able to paste content into a personal app. Build it up again, Tim, just with the space. Yeah, same thing with the Word. I may be allowed to paste content, but don't let it save to my personal storage. And maybe I always want to allow the saving in, say, OneDrive only. Don't let it save anywhere else. These are all very doable, and it maximizes your safeguards, but it actually also improves your user experience. It makes things more efficient. It makes things, I can say as a CISO myself, a chief security officer, that was one of my former jobs. I can say I feel confident that our data is being protected. So I can say yes more to business functions that involve collaborations just like this.
Yeah, and I'd say the proper deployment of DLP for me as a productivity lead supports the use of things like Power Platform, right? Using Power Apps and Flow, right? So because Flow and or Power Automate, right? The flows we write there and Power Apps will respect these DLP rules, right? As long as they're set up correctly, they will respect these rules, even if you have citizen developers writing Power Apps that don't even know they're there. And
That's right.
so it's really critical for a tool like DLP to span your cloud landscape, the entire thing.
That's right. If you think about like protecting your data, if I define in our DLP and our protection mechanisms that I don't want the content to be revealed on an insecure browser, it'll be a black box. Simple as that. So really powerful stuff. Now, if you think about your intellectual property, or maybe PII or PHI. Now, this is the design schematics for the Death Star ventilation port. The thing we don't want to get outside of the organization. And if you hit a space bar within your productivity tools, Excel, email, you have this ability to tag a document and involve your user community in the act of tagging that. You can also automate it wherever I see a social security number, or even in this Death Star, a little bit joking kind of thing, but say it is intellectual property. And I know that I'm in the Death Star manufacturing business. It's my company. And so anytime I have the word design adjacent to ventilation, I can build a string that allows me to say, anytime I see that, I want to put a safeguard and automatically encrypt that and tag it as intellectual property. That's super easy to do. It's coming up with those recipes and the use cases. That's the biggest, not challenge, but that's the biggest investment. And then executing how those data are treated as they move around the enterprise and where should they be allowed to move or not move are also part of the equation. Now,
There's a lot of decisions that go into these labels, and so that's where having that governance group with strategic, operational, and tactical governance can really make a big difference for the organization.
That's a great point. Hit the space bar, we might see a different viewpoint. Yeah. So sorry for the eye chart on this small slide, but what I've done is we put together an email. We let the tools do some action for us. This is actually our own environment, just as a test. So essentially, I put an email together with a social security number. Microsoft Information Protection and the DLP functions pick that off. And they said, I've always had that top red frame, the top red box, the classification function. That's something that our IT has built for us as a company to say, hey, it's important that security is a team sport, and this is where that comes into play. Automation is one thing, but when I see something, I can actually click, this is between, me and the company alone, and no one else should be part of this, or, basically tagging it and elevating. And if I try to de-elevate, maybe I have to give a reason for that. Those are parts of the governance around data classification. The next bullet, the tooltip warning, is an action that you can have. So the act of me typing a social security number into an email form, an email itself, the body of an email, popped this message where the tool detected the social security number and said, hey, you might not want to do that. It's against company policy. Those tooltips can be constructed in your own company's language. So There's some defaults there, but typically people will say it's against company policy or it's against Catapult policy to put that sort of data. What are you doing, Ed? That kind of thing. And then the last thing is you can have actions based on the content. This is not one and the other and the other. They can be interchangeable, but very often people will say, hey, I want to automate, especially on stuff that is considered restricted. And I want to mention that one thing. As a data specialist myself and a policy guy, and having seen the good, the bad, the ugly on data classification efforts just in my career, think if you're revamping your data classification strategy, and I'm not sure how many are, some people may be bringing things up to more modern terminology, or maybe starting from scratch, or just polishing up existing. But when you're in the process of defining your data classifications, keep them simple, because if you have 15, 16 different data classifications, your end users are going to get lost. Your functional frontline workers will not know what the heck to choose if they're part of that team sport. So make it easy on everybody and keep it simple. The KISS method definitely applies with the number of classifications, and it's real easy to get carried away on that. But if I see at the top of ours, confidential, lock it down, public, sensitive, confidential, or maybe there's a fourth one, restricted. If it's restricted and that is of the type that has PHI, personally personal protected health info, or PII, personally identifiable info, or PCI, payment card industry data, all that stuff we'd all probably agree is you kind of can't let it get in an email. You define those things as restricted, and now you can actually say, anytime I see that, automate the encryption of that. And this can be had within all of your productivity. So while you're seeing an email here, the same actions can carry out for an Excel or a Word or PowerPoint or any of those things. Next slide.
And we're running a little low on time, so we'll need to.
All right. These are super fast. Key points on working from a remote vantage point. Super important with teams, whether you're working in the office or externally, but think of MFA. That's a really important thing. Also think about conditional access, which if you think of device management as part of the equation, if the device is secure, then let's not hit the user up for multi-factor every time. Conditional access can be your friend with helping enhance the user's experience. They won't be frustrated with multi-factor, and they'll only get hit up when they're in more risky situations. Next slide. Self-service. If there's there's a lot of advanced security tools in M365 to consider. Compromised account detection can automatically reset a user's password and bump out a user if it's been compromised with with a pretty high degree of certainty that happened. You need to have a way for your users to re-engage and validate they are who they say they are, rather than call your help desk every time, which is about 30% of the workload typical help desk see. Automate it, build self-service. Same thing for group delegation and approvals, just like Tim talked about with Power Automate, the ability to self-serve and have a flow that pushes things through the approval process. Those things can be really super effective at helping user experience greatly improve it. Next one. Always, regardless of the situation, but especially now since bad actors are targeting people who are working from home, lock down your privileged accounts. It's not just put your admins on MFA. You might want to consider privileged identity management, where nobody has priv user, but they request it as it's needed. Tim, you're sharing your face, so I'm taking it we're out on time.
Oh, we are. I think we are out of time. But let me make sure we'll pop back in. I think we're at our last slide and we're at questions and answers. So, Sorry, with after PIM there.
Yeah, so PIM is good to protect your admins. There are a few other things. We've covered a lot of them over the course of the day with other sessions. This deck has a few other pieces, but maybe maybe we answer some questions if we have a minute, if there are any.
I think one of the key takeaways from this session is really to make sure that you've prepared people for governance. Putting in something like MFA without preparing your users for that is a recipe for a poor user experience. All right.
Well, it looks like we're wrapping up. I don't know if you showed the survey or the free stuff. There's a survey and someone can be enrolled, and it's getting towards the end of the day. So complete that survey that Shanna had posted, and that'll automatically enroll you into a prize drawing for a gift card. And then there's a couple of things that you can take advantage of as far as follow-ups. Our Teams assessments, security assessments can help you, in a number of ways. So feel free to reach out to us, and we really appreciate your time today and spending that with us.
Yeah, and Catapult has a specific security assessment and a specific Teams or digital workplace assessment that can help you set some of this governance in motion if you don't have it already, or we can help you tune it to address specific organizational needs.